agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government.
Welcome to the Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. With me today is my regular co-host, Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson. Hey, Jay, how you doing?
I'm good.
So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we don't have an interview lined up this week, so we thought we'd take some listener mail that's been piling up, and see what we can see if we can bring light to their darkness,
as opposed to just heat. Absolutely. So yeah, I think you did such a great job of running the show on Saturday. I'm more than content to just kick back and let you have at it.
All right. So our first epistle comes from Brian, who writes, with regards to Medicare for all, I tend to fall in line with Mike. As a medical professional myself, I can tell you firsthand just how many problems stem directly from lack of universal coverage. It's vital to take steps to get there as soon as possible, and so politically that will require a more moderate approach. With all this discussion on Medicaid for all, there's always this counter-argument that will not pay for itself with the increased tax revenue that comes from what people would pay on their premiums anyway. Candidates in support of Medicare for all never seem to have a detailed rebuttal for this. You guys briefly made reference to the rearranging of money, but again, didn't get much into the details. I'm curious how you both feel about the responsibilities of employers with regards to the money that they would otherwise spend on their portion of the premiums. Should that money go to employees in the case of Medicare for all, or will the new policy be an excuse for them to pocket extra profit without their employees benefiting like they really should?
I love that question. I think it's really.
You know where I am on that. So.
Well, yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. So essentially, just to kind of give a little bit of background on this. So if the argument for Medicare for all folks that yes, it's going to cost a lot of money, but it won't change. In fact, it will probably even lower overall healthcare spending because money that was spent by private employers for healthcare for their employees, which is around, but still, I think a small majority of all healthcare is provided by employees in the United States, then they would be able to shift that money to something else. And it seems like Brian's question is, well, would that go into employees' pockets? Or would they just pocket it themselves, in other words? So,
I'd pocket it.
Well, I would think that...
No, I'm being facetious, but go ahead.
But I would think that actually the conservative argument would be it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
In the sense that, in fact, because if it goes in their own pockets, it's not like they're putting it in a Scrooge McDuck vault, but it would actually get invested and earn interest and, it be able to go into other,
the capital will go wherever it is most needed. And I think
exactly.
That would be the thing. And so if it were to make sense in their industry, if hiring is competitive, then it would likely go into increased salaries or increased other benefits. If it's a situation of that company could do better by, revamping its equipment or something like that and making capital expenditures, it'll go into that. If it's something else, then maybe it's building a new branch or a new something or other. I think that's the answer. Is it just that just depends on where the business wants to spend it, and I think that's probably the right answer to my mind.
Yeah, and that's why I agree with you entirely, and I like the idea I think it's important to understand the burden that kind of mandatory, if you will, healthcare for a lot of employees. Or employers, I'm sorry, it is a pretty big burden. It's a big part of worker compensation. And if you can free up that part of it to things that are better investments, that is potentially a good way to grow the economy and to make everyone better off. And so that, to me, that's what I see as one of the benefits of relieving employers of this burden is allowing capital to go to places where it is better able to invest and grow the economy, whether that's to better compensate employees or to invest in certain things. So that's why I see it as a big win.
Okay. Well, so I think the other piece of the equation that we're not looking at, though, is there's this assumption that Medicare for all will pass. It will be expensive, but for some, these corporations will not face increased tax burden. And I
Right.
think obviously they would. I mean, the numbers
Yeah, and
that
that's a good
people have been
point.
talking
Yeah.
about, 34 trillion. So, I mean, the money that they are spending on their benefits might well go into paying taxes. The government will then use to spend for benefits.
But and I think I think
But
you
I
could
mean,
make a case.
there's been no outline exactly about how the money gets raised, other than sort of vague, tax the rich
Yeah.
type things. And again, I think you agree with me that the numbers are really pretty staggering.
Yeah.
And you can't. I don't think there's any way to get there just by saying, well, we're going to have a tax on billionaires. It's going to be a broad based
Yeah.
tax.
But I think for a lot of employers, they would feel like it would be great even if they didn't save any money, if it was just kind of the money they go into healthcare for employees goes into, higher taxes, that being relieved of the burden of having to deal with the whole healthcare issue. Because I know every year when it comes to new enrollment for, my employer's healthcare, we grouse about the crummy plans and choices and the amounts and so forth. And I think a lot of employers would rather have us grousing about the federal government than about them as employers, essentially. And it kind of levels the playing field as well. So I think that could benefit especially a lot of small employers who don't have the ability to offer the plans to some of these big employers. So I think there are a lot of reasons to like Medicare for all, and this is just one of them.
Okay, all right. Well, I still don't like it, but I get your reasons, and I hopefully that's an answer to Tyler's question, or to Brian's question.
Brian's question.
Brian's question. Next up, Tyler. Tyler writes, Barr's argument, meaning Attorney General Barr, on why Trump couldn't have obstructed justice because there was no underlying crime to hide misses a critical point. I think Trump wasn't obstructing to hide collusion. I think he was obstructing to hide campaign finance violations and whatever shady things his business was doing. We already know they're cooking the books to hide the payoffs for his affairs and probably committed tax fraud by writing the Cohen reimbursements off as a business expense. And if we're to believe Cohen, it looks as the way they may have committed insurance and bank fraud. I think Trump and his businesses are facing a lot of legal exposure. Remember Trump's red line. Don't look at my business or finances. Trump personally interviewed only 2 AG appointees, both with jurisdiction over business in New York. I think that's why Trump wanted to quash these investigations, not because he conspired with Putin, though it's possible Putin may still have dirt on Trump that makes him act like a whip dog. Trump's golf courses and $400+ million of cash purchases look very suspicious to me. All right. Well, I mean, I guess the question, we touched on this a little bit on the Saturday show.
Mm-hmm.
About with the conclusion of obstruction of justice, and can one obstruct justice even if they are not obstructing that crime? And I think the answer is yes. I think Tyler's correct there. You can still obstruct justice even if you're not necessarily trying to cover up that particular crime. The more difficult question comes when it comes to a president, though, in terms of when a president obstructs justice, because the president is in charge of the justice system. And can essentially do what he will with that justice system, and the role or the remedy would be a political one. So I mean, I think, and again, the way I laid out, and none of this has been really tested in court, but it's kind of the general feeling consensus, I guess, or at least here's what I think is that. Trump could only obstruct justice if he were seeking to obstruct an investigation into him. Now, what Tyler writes, to some extent, could also count that, right?
Right. Yeah.
But we don't know yet. And there's also, again, a sort of a countervailing idea that, look, if you're the president, you can fire the attorney general or fire the FBI director for any reason you want. Or if you have a good reason, then whatever bad reason you might have had is sort of, I mean, it just doesn't matter, right?
And
all you need is one good reason. Yeah.
The benefit of the doubt has to go to the president on that, obviously, like anyone who's been accused of this, I would say. And so trying to get into that mental state, did he fire him because he thought he was corrupt and incompetent, or did he fire him because he wanted to obstruct justice into the investigation? Unless you can get into, without some pretty compelling evidence, that
I like it
requires
because it tastes
judging.
great and it's less filling. I mean, it's
Exactly.
sort of.
So I share the frustration of a lot of people on the left who believe that Donald Trump is a thoroughly corrupt individual, entirely unfit for the presidency. I agree with Nancy Pelosi on this, where she said flat out he's corrupt and unfit, but we can't get the goods on him. So let's focus on our policy differences, and at some point I also think that while there's a certain amount of political mileage to be made on keeping the pressure on these investigations, at some point you say, well, what's the practical result
There's
of
sort
all
of
this?
diminishing returns at some point.
Exactly.
And the point I tried to make on the Saturday show, I think there's diminishing returns, and there's also risks in sort of overpromising with these investigations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, moving on. Eric asks, I would love to know what two areas do you disagree with those on your side of the aisle? For example, as a conservative, I oppose the death penalty and don't support tort reform. Need nuclear power, big government. Is this your note to me? I see.
Yeah, for me, I wanted to say that I thought about this, and I made a couple of notes on the question just so I'd remember. But I think it's a great question, and I really wanted to think about that a lot. And for me, I'm kind of an apostate liberal in a lot of ways, because of course, Jay, I started out on your side of the aisle until I became, enlightened. But two issues that really always come up for me are nuclear power and my skepticism of big government, especially big activist government, big changes right away. The nuclear power thing's kind of a more micro level thing. I've done, a fair amount of research on this, and it seems to me that you can make a very strong case on the fact that nuclear power is far safer than, certainly far safer than fossil fuel power, just because all the people who are hurt or killed in, oil rigs and coal mining, all other kinds of stuff. Now, nuclear disasters certainly get more publicity, but when you look at the people who are actually harmed and the overall damage, I think that certainly there's a lot less of an overall risk. And given the fact that that is our only near-term alternative right now for non-fossil-based fuel, especially in terms of being able to reliably generate and transmit it, which is kind of the key problem with other renewables, that I think we need to put a lot more effort into. We need to take a lot more of the regulatory burden off. It's ridiculously difficult to start a nuclear power plant, which is the reason why
we've tried.
Yeah, we have. We have. And so newer designs are much safer than older designs, but the development of newer designs has been thwarted considerably by the fact that these companies know that this is a multi-billion-dollar endeavor, and they're probably not going to get the authorizations they need. So why bother investing in the technology when they can't do this? And, just on a totally
thwarted by
level,
the very big central government that you're so skeptical of.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess that fits into the second thing is that, I am still, while in terms of policies, I very much identify with the left, kind of helping out the little guy and my concerns with economic and other forms of inequality and that sort of thing. I also am just hugely skeptical of government being able to save us through some sweeping gestures, that sort of thing. I mean, I feel like big changes mean big unintended consequences. I think we have thousands of years of history that show us this. And so when I see something like the Green New Deal or something, the immediate thing I think is, my God, that's the last thing I'd want to see happen right away, because with all the stuff we'd want to get, there'd be tons of stuff that we don't want to get. And so I feel like having a certain amount of humility is hugely important. I believe that this isn't just an issue for liberals. When I see conservatives calling about just radically changing the tax code and doing this other stuff, I think, well, that's the same hubris that I think is just incredibly, short-sighted and just totally goes against human nature. And that's why I feel that we almost have no real conservatives in politics today, meaning in the Burkean sense of, respecting human limits and how small and weak and, not that smart even the best of us are. And so that to me is clearly that goes against the kind of progressive idea of just we can do it and we can make the world a better place if we just implement these big plans. And so those are two things that I kind of part company with on my side.
Okay, those are good. For me, so the death penalty, and here's the thing, because I wouldn't say I'd necessarily oppose the death penalty, but I'm certainly not a fan of it. And I'll give you some of my reasons. Is, I mean, I worked as a clerk in the federal appeals court, and I dealt with death penalty cases. And there were two things that struck me about it. One is, to the extent that we're seeking to use this as a deterrent and or punishment, it's sort of like a really expensive government program that doesn't work very well. Second, there's an incredible human toll that I think people don't realize that it takes on the system, on people involved in the system. And there is the problem of, there's the possibility that an innocent person could be put to death. I don't think that happens often, but I certainly would say it's probably happened before. And there's always again, humans are fallible, juries are fallible. Things can go wrong. And so, yeah, I have qualms about it.
Let me just say, Jay, on that, I didn't really appreciate that issue as much as I probably should have. And then a few weeks ago on the show, we had Mark Godsey on, who's the head of the Ohio Innocence Project.
Yeah.
And
they do a lot of really great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really opened my eyes, and just to see some of the things that go into that, and hearing from him, it's like, so I'm totally with you on that. For sure.
Yeah. That said, I mean, here's the counterweight to that. Here in Cleveland, we had the terrible, crazy case where this guy Ariel Castro kidnapped 3 women and held them in his basement for like a period of 10 years, I think. So what happened is, when that case went to trial, the prosecutors said, we are pursuing the death penalty. And what happened is, Castro ended up taking a life sentence plea deal. That saved those victims from having to relive this, having to testify. It saved the state the burden and cost of what would have been sort of a huge, crazy circus of a trial. All that. So I also see it from that perspective, that the death penalty is helpful in some cases to get those plea bargains. Castro then eventually hung himself in prison, so it all sort of worked out. I think there's something to be said there, and I think there's also something to be said that for the most heinous crimes, we ought to have that penalty on the books, just sort of as a societal statement. So I guess I would say I don't subscribe to the conservative idea that I'm for the death penalty. I don't know that I'm necessarily against it. I suppose I'm kind of agnostic, but I think that's an interesting question. Other place where I differ with my side of the aisle. Sometimes I would say it's some of the social issue hot button things that come up. And it's not that I disagree with the position, I disagree with the forum. I think there are, for example, a lot of Christian conservatives who view the decline of our our country, Western civilization, and sort of moral slide and all this kind of stuff as a result of removing God from public spaces and certain policies that are let's say not anti-religion, or some people could say religious neutral, and therefore the answer is to undo that. And in my sense is that's not the way to go. I just, from a constitutional standpoint, right, the better way to go is to strengthen your institutions and your churches and communities and so forth. So sometimes I'm for example, when conservatives get hung up about Ten Commandments displays or something like that, again, I'm on the one hand, as judicially, I think most of the time those types of things are permissible constitutionally. I don't think our Constitution requires us to banish any religious reference from the public square, and I don't think a lot of those types of things tend to amount to what would be a government establishment of religion. But by the same token, sometimes the bills that here's like another, like the restroom bill stuff. Remember when we went through all that? Again, the Burkean in me and you would probably say, do we, first of all, it was a bad idea for, the Obama administration to have rules and say, okay, this has to be how we're going to run our bathrooms. But to have a conservative response saying, no, this is how we have to run our bathrooms, the real conservative response ought to be, it's none of the government's damn business how you run your bathroom. You know what I mean? It's whatever works. If it works for you, and my sense is, this had worked for, people for years. That this is just not an area that the government needs to wade into. So I'd say I differ with some conservatives on that, and there's some social things that I think sometimes, it's almost they think the government can fix this when I think the better position is benign neglect, right? I mean, it's none of the government's business. Stay out of it. Was that good?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Well, I would also maybe I would say I'm not. I can't say I'm an absolutist on Second Amendment gun stuff. So I would differ on, and again, a lot of it depends on the bill, the stuff we're talking about, right? It comes down to kind of the nuts and bolts of it. So
yeah,
I like nuclear power too. So anyway, in fact, Dusty writes, I know Mike likes governors, as do I, but how does he feel about mayors and veterans? Pete Buttigieg seems to be gaining a little bit of traction, but still seems a long shot. I'd be curious to see him run for governor, build up some credentials, and then make a run of it later. Although a Buttigieg ticket would be fun to say at least. Exactly, and I kind of stumbled over it. So there you go. So what do you think of a Buttigieg?
I like Mayor Pete, and I think maybe in 10 years or so he might be ready. So right now I think he's an intriguing guy, very interesting guy. Certainly, it seems to be
Speaks Maltese.
Yeah, incredibly intellectually
I didn't even know that
curious.
was a real language.
Yeah, I know. So I think he's the future of the Democratic Party. I don't think he's quite the present, but I do think he's an intriguing guy. I don't think he's even quite ready for the vice presidential. If he's running for anything, I would think it would be that. But from what I've heard from him, I really like him, and but I still remain very much a Hickenlooper guy.
Okay.
I love those governors.
Yeah, no, I from what I've seen, I think he's an interesting guy. I think it's a huge jump to make the jump from municipal mayor, to president for the president,
yeah.
unless say you're something like mayor of New York or something. So yeah, I think he's got to do another stint in the the state level. But no, I think he's an interesting person to watch.
Yeah.
So Randy writes, my good friend Scott, one of the biggest supporters of the show, I should mention, came to me the other day and asked me why all of us Democrats hate Israel. Right, Mike? What are your thoughts about Israel and the recent backing of the administration in the Golan Heights?
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting question, and I could totally hear Scott asking that question. Scott's I love Scott because he's been such a great supporter of the show, and he's a very blunt guy, and I love that about him.
Scott tends to give me kind of some cover sometimes, I think. So.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Well, number one, I would say not all of us Democrats hate Israel, but certainly there are some Democrats who have very strong feelings about Israel, and I've made no secret about my concerns about Israel's, I guess you could say, Israel's human rights record. I support a two-state solution, and I think there are a lot of Israelis who don't support a two-state solution. I can't speak for all Democrats, but I think that I can say that a lot of us on the right, on the left, feel that Israel is being more than a little hypocritical, especially given its past, about not honoring, not respecting human rights of Palestinians and not trying to allow them for more self-determination and not treating them fairly. On the other hand, and this is me speaking for me as kind of a very centrist Democrat or liberal, I understand the intense hatred that many people in the Middle East have for Israel, and that there, in fact, are still governments who pretty clearly have it as their stated policy to destroy Israel. And that, understandably, can cause some pretty strong reactions. And so I agree. I certainly agree that Israel has some problems, and I don't think that they treat the Palestinians the way the Palestinians should be treated. But I can understand why they do some of the things they do. But I don't think that that means that we shouldn't put pressure on them to do all they can to kind of honor their highest ideals, which I believe are good democratic ideals. And so that's kind of where I stand on it.
All right. I love Israel. So, I mean, I guess I'll leave it at that. But I think a lot of it, on the left, there's always this sense of siding with the beleaguered, oppressed,
absolutely,
for people, and the Palestinians have stepped into that role. The beleaguered, oppressed. We probably had like sort of anti-Western, oppressed people. And I think that's where there's sympathy for the Palestinians comes from, and as a go along with it, sort of an antipathy towards Israel. And I think it's a shame because I think Israel is one of our greatest allies, does great work in a very difficult place in the world, bringing sort of the ideals of a Western civilization into the Middle East. But there we go.
And I agree, and that's why I think that we should hold our friends to higher standards than our kind of our enemies, or what have I hate to use the word enemies, but so yeah, I just ask that Israel live up to its best vision of itself, and I think that that means treating all people with decency and fairness and all that. Now, the other part of the question, my thoughts about Israel and the recent backing of the administration, recognizing that the Golan Heights is a legitimate part of Israel. I disagree with that. I side with the international community. I don't see that as legitimately part of Israel. And again, it's kind of the U.S. and Israel versus the world on this, and I'm siding with the world on this.
All right. I'm siding with America, Mike.
Okay.
Eric, different Eric, commented on our Facebook page wanting to know if Mike is excited about Bernie polling even in the polls with Biden. And then, Dave responded wondering if Mike is excited about Bernie at all. Well, Mike, are you excited about Bernie?
I'm excited about Hickenlooper. Have I mentioned that yet, Jay? I'm going to do my best to start a Hickenlooper kind of momentum. But, you recall, Jay, because we've been doing this for a while now. You recall there were moments that I got really enthused about something Bernie would say. I got swept up in a little bit of the Bernie mania. And so I like him. I like what he stands for. But I believe that, and I like it. I feel like kind of Bernie and Elizabeth Warren's kind of the slightly more maybe pragmatic version of Bernie on some things, but it's that same kind of thing. And I love what they stand for, the progressives, and I agree with their goals not entirely, but to a great extent. But again, I tend to think as someone who has a background in, kind of as an institutionalist, as a policy guy, and I ask myself, okay, if I share those goals, what do I think is the most plausible path to those goals? And that's where I part company with them. And that's why, all kidding aside, I tend to side much more with the kind of moderate incrementalist centrist, because the last thing I want is a Democrat who says the Trump version of I alone can fix this comes in over-promising, pushing these big things that just do more to increase our levels of polarization. That's why, in 2016, if I would have, kind of gun to my head, if I would have had a vote for any of the Republicans, it would have been John Kasich, because I felt like, even though he was the one who was kind of more moderate on those things. And so I think that's the way forward. So it's not that I disagree with a lot of the goals. I admire the passion. I admire the passion and the dedication of the Bernie supporters and the Warren supporters and the Buttigieg supporters, but I just don't see that that's the way forward, though Buttigieg is much more moderate, and he has to be because he's a mayor, and so that's one of the things I like about him. So again, that's my response to that.
All right. But how do you justify or hold at the same time the idea of you're for the Bernie and Sanders goals, but still retain the skepticism of big central government from 2 questions ago?
Well, I think there are two questions. It's what do we want America to look like? And I want America to look like a country where there isn't this massive difference in not just in income, but in opportunities, where we're a country where we have the kind of intergenerational mobility that we used to have. We're trailing so many other countries in that. Hey, I want to make America great too, as great as it possibly can be. I share those goals, and so where I differ is in how we get there. So I think those are goals that most of us share. We want an equal, just America where people are free to pursue their dreams and they don't feel like they're unfree due to whether it's excessive government regulations or having to be constantly worried about, I can't go to the doctor because I don't have health care coverage, or how am I going to get my kids a good education? I think most of us share that. So it's really a question of tactics to get there.
All right. So Mike, different Mike, wonders what we think about post-2020 gerrymandering, whether it's going to be more prevalent, less prevalent, or stay about the same. And I guess my first answer would be, well, it depends on what the Supreme Court is going to say.
Yeah.
In probably a couple months from now. There was a case argued, several cases actually combined, where the court took up the idea of, is there authority to restrict gerrymandering based on political considerations. So we'll see how that comes out. My sense is, that's not something the court has recognized before, and my sense is that to the extent there is a ruling that would recognize some interest in partisan fairness, I think it'd be pretty narrowly drawn. So my sense is I don't know that things will change dramatically. That would be mine, because keep in mind the way it works is in most states. Look, we're going to have a census, and then the party in power essentially will redraw the districts. Party in power probably doesn't change much in most of these states, and even there's some give and take, and there's a weird sort of math sometimes, right? And that you write it so that there's going to have to be so many districts that the other side is going to win, and there's so many districts that you're going to win. It's just kind of carving up the others. And then there's also the factors you have to consider under the Voting Rights Act and so forth. So I think, one, it's going to depend on what the Supreme Court says. If the Supreme Court were to come out with some sweeping opinion saying, this is how you have to draw districts from now on, I don't think that's going to happen. Then that would change things. Otherwise, I think it's going to be more or less the same as it's ever been.
Yeah. I mostly agree with you on that. When you look back at the initial arguments on the gerrymandering cases, the sense of things was that the swing vote was Justice Kennedy, who kind of felt like, well, yeah, there probably can be impermissible partisan gerrymandering. I just need I need a good test for that, and I haven't seen that yet. But of course, now with Justice Kennedy gone, I don't see this court finding that or buying into that logic. But also, I should say, pretty clearly we see a movement in a number of states to try to depoliticize this. Now, that can only go so far because, of course, in the most part, these movements have to come through initiatives and referenda. That's not something that's available
to... Well, it's inherently political.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it can be made less political through various setting up various commissions, and I think the few states that have done that, and Ohio's in that number, have made some strides. And here's where the kind of Burkean conservative in me says, well, that's kind of the way things should go in a way, because now this might take 20 years, right? And that seems like an eternity. But on the other hand, I recognize that not all states have the ability to bypass their legislature, especially on certain issues. A lot depends on how the state constitution is and how their laws about initiatives and referendums are. And of course, some states don't have those at all. And so I understand those arguments, and I'm sympathetic to that, very sympathetic to that. And I actually think that there is a pretty good test right now that political scientists, in fact, have taken a big hand in developing. And so yay to my discipline for that.
Right. But, and that is what's being argued at the Supreme Court.
Yeah. And so while I think that if I were on the Supreme Court, I would actually I would vote for, employing that test that has been suggesting and saying that there is partisan gerrymandering that is unconstitutional, and here's a test that should be employed. I understand the arguments against that. I think they're reasonable arguments, but I just think on balance they're not quite as strong. So while I'm not saying I'm on the fence. I think that my side has it right on this, but I don't think that the other side is being ridiculous on this. But and I think it's going to kind of continue, just like you said, kind of more or less along the same lines. So I think it will be, if anything, the technology has gotten slightly better, the data mining and other stuff. So maybe it can get slightly more efficient, but it's already pretty good. I mean, we're pretty bad, actually.
I was going to say that helps you gerrymander the more.
Yeah, exactly.
So last question, Matt asks, I love this question, Matt. How are we supposed to trust the media that is disappointed that the president isn't a Russian agent, especially after they told us for 3 years that we should be angry if the president is a Russian agent? And Mike, I'll let you go with that, because I like Matt, have sensed the media's disappointment well, again, as you said Saturday, you're not going to go all the way to say no collusion, but at least you would agree that Trump is not a Russian agent.
Yes, I will. Okay. I will flat out say, I will go on the record saying I do not believe that Donald Trump is a Russian agent. Yeah, this is not like a bizarre kind of sequel to The Americans or something like that. So no. I guess I understand what Matt's saying, and I think it really depends. In a way, I hate talking about the media because it's not one big undifferentiated thing, right? So I think
name that.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. There are parts of the media that I think absolutely, told us that Donald Trump was almost, in effect, a Russian agent, and that they are clearly disappointed that he's not, are very skeptical about what Barr is saying. And I think those parts of the media should be held up to a lot of scrutiny. That's not the media. I mean, I would divide it into not really conservative and liberal media. My main division is what I would call responsible and irresponsible media, or sensationalist and non-sensationalist media. Now, sometimes certain organs have combinations of those. Like, my favorite whipping boy for this, I like to pick on one on my own side, is Vox. Vox does some amazing stuff, some amazing what they call explainers on some issues, and I think they can be really invaluable. But they can go so far off the deep end to kind of, pull that kind of clickbaity type of stuff and pull in that audience and preach to that choir. I think that happens on both sides, certainly. And so, yeah, I think that we shouldn't trust those parts of the media. But I absolutely trust, what I call the responsible media, which is why, I think the Wall Street Journal does a lot of great work. I think there are certain folks writing for National Review and the American Interest who I find invaluable, even though they're conservative organs. So I think the thing is to be very selective and understand that sensationalist media, that's how they make their money, by pushing that polarization and by pushing those sensationalist storylines. And I think it's our obligation to hold them up to scrutiny, but understand that there is no such thing as the media, any more than there's such a thing as television. So, to me, saying the media is bad is like saying television is bad. Well, yeah, some of it really sucks, but some of it's really quite good. And it's our job to pick out the good stuff and to hold that up as examples and to, again, to point out the bad stuff.
Well, let me read something. This is from the I think White House Correspondents Association, which awarded its annual prize for excellence in presidential news coverage to under deadline pressure to Evan Perez, Jim Sciutto, Jake Tapper, and Carl Bernstein, the judge of CNN. And judges wrote, these four journalists and a number of other CNN reporters broke the story that the intelligence community had briefed President Barack Obama and then President-elect Trump that Russia had compromising information about Trump. The CNN team later reported that then FBI Director Comey personally briefed Trump about the dossier. Thanks to the CNN investigation, the dossier is now part of the lexicon. The depth of reporting demonstrated in these remarkable and important pieces and the constant updates as new information continued to be uncovered showed breaking news reporting at its best. But we now know that the dossier seems to be a complete work of fiction, that no one has been able to verify any of this. I think that's, I think this is what, we can certainly pick on Vox, and I'm happy to do that. But it's not just Vox. It's a lot of mainstream places that played this up, or fail to follow up. For example, Washington Post recently, speaking with Adam Schiff, is still insistent that there is collusion, that he has evidence that, and Adam Schiff, I think, will win the Joe McCarthy Award on this. But the Post sort of dutifully takes this, and I understand sometimes the job of a newspaper is to report what someone says.
Yeah,
they're not always there. They're not always there to challenge it or to, debate them. But it seems at some point it's incumbent to say, well, come on, now that we've had, in light of a 2-year investigation and so forth. How do you keep making these claims? And if you have the evidence, let's see it. Yeah,
I don't disagree with you. I might disagree on some particulars, but I would say that, we can say exactly the same things, in fact, to maybe even a greater extent for, say, Fox News, which to many people on the left, and I agree, has become almost an organ of the Trump organization, And so, again, to me, I think we mischaracterize this as a thing of the left or a thing of the right. I think a lot more of the media has become irresponsible media, and I think that's just because they're going where the listeners are, they're going where the money is. And so I don't want to make this a partisan issue, not because I'm just trying to be all kumbaya about it, because I think it's just the nature of the new media environment where this is what it's. You take a look at CNN, for instance, or Fox News, where I would argue that even Fox News was somewhat more responsible earlier on, but now you got a Sean Hannity who's just this, I would argue, somewhat unhinged character.
Well, but let's also make the difference between a Sean Hannity, who is an editorial comment person, as opposed to a hard news reporter.
Right, and I don't think people make that
difference between Sean Hannity and
absolutely.
Mike Sunday morning.
Boy, I wouldn't know. I don't watch TV news, so I stay away from it. It's just, I think it just rots my brain. So no, I haven't watched TV news in forever for exactly that reason. But, when you talk about the news stuff too, then I also think we need to talk about, I have a big problem with the whole breaking news thing. I think this whole 24-hour news cycle stuff has led to more bad news reporting. But again, it's what sells. It's technology drives it. And not just because I'm this old guy pining for the old days, but I think you can make a real good argument that political news on a release scale of less than every 24 hours is almost inherently going to be badly reported, just because you don't have the time to dig in and check stuff and so forth. But it's what people want, And so I think we're all being kind of driven into this by forces that are larger than certainly partisan forces. And I think it's a big problem. I don't have a solution for it. I would love a world where we got our news once a week, where it was carefully digested and thought about and all that, but that's not the world we live in.
Yeah. Well, I will respond to Matt's question that, I think, look, I don't trust the media.
Well, no, I don't think
that's not to be.
That's not true, though.
No, it is
you
true.
trust certain parts of the media. You trust the Wall Street Journal, don't you?
Sure.
So you trust?
But even there, let's put it this way: when I read any story, regardless of the source, I think I'm skeptical and I'm cognizant of the limitations of that reporter, right?
Sure.
I am skeptical when I read something for the first time, especially if it seems to be something that is shocking or whoa, that's and I think you and I both have said this. If you read a story that you feel like seems too good to be true for your side, it probably is.
Yeah.
Except Jussie Smollett. That just keeps getting better. That's even better than you can imagine.
Yeah.
But no, I think that the media has done itself a good deal of harm because of this, and I think it's good that now questions are being asked of, look, we went through this 2 years of making claims, the perhaps again one of the craziest claims in U.S. history, that the president is really a Russian agent. either knowingly or unknowingly, or sort of by a silent quid pro quo. And with the only evidence to back it up, this goofy dossier, that no one will confirm who exactly wrote or where they got the information, and can't be verified by anyone. So I think, Matt, I would continue to be skeptical, and hopefully that skepticism society wide will pay off in better reporting.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. In fact, I entirely agree with how the way you define skepticism. But I think the bigger problem is just by dismissing anything that doesn't meet your pre-existing ideological views as fake news. And I think that's the real problem here.
Yeah.
So, I think also it's important not to retreat into your ideologically comfortable media and just say, well, if it's coming from the New York Times,
sure,
or if it's coming from, National Review, then it must necessarily be
sure.
fake. I'm going to assume that they're wrong, and you prove me wrong.
Tell you what, I will post something on the Facebook because I can't find it now, but it's something I read a week or so ago, which I think Matt will enjoy and I will enjoy. That sort of documents some of the biggest news fumbles of the Mueller investigation, and I think let's call them out and hold them accountable. So.
Yeah, I think the media should absolutely be held accountable, which is why I think it's so tragic that the main media source, it seems like for the right, Fox News, has just such, I would say, horrifically low standards.
Well, I'll post my list on the drop balls, and we can take it from there. But one thing is for sure that Mike, you and I are certainly accountable.
Absolutely.
We have answered all our listener mail for this week and gotten caught up. So with that, I think we will sign off and until we meet again.
Yeah, and just to let everyone know, if you like the sort of responsible sort of thing that we're trying to do, right? Because we're accountable and all that. Hey, you can help us. You can support us in doing that. We really would appreciate it if you can. You can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/politicsguys or politicsguys.com/support. And if you can't afford to do that, if you already are, say, gee, stop asking us for money, guys. If you could just
tell your friends.
Yeah, exactly. That's a huge deal. To subscribe to the show, let people know, leave reviews. We would really appreciate. We love doing this. We believe that this is an important thing to do. We know you do too. And getting the word out is really the way that we can make sure we are able to do this for years to come, actually. All right, the executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Bruce Johnson, Wilmer Moreno, and Benji Fishman. Today's show is produced by us, me and Jay, Michael Baranowski and Jay Carson. And we will, of course, be back with a new show next week. We do hope you join us.